When you think about military history, you think about epic battles, right? Great generals, huge armies. Well, what if I told you about a time a national military declared war on birds and then lost? Yeah, you heard me right. This is the incredible and kind of hilarious story of the Great Emu War.
So just let that quote sink in for a second. That's not a general praising an enemy's state-of-the-art kinks. Nope. That's Major GPW Meredith, the actual commander on the ground for the Royal Australian Artillery, talking about emus, birds. It just perfectly sets the stage for how unbelievably strange this whole thing was.
So, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How on earth does a modern army armed with machine guns actually lose a war to a bunch of birds? I know, it sounds like the start of a bad joke, but this really happened. It's a real part of Australian history. And to understand how, we've got to go back to the 1930s.
Okay, so let's set the scene. The year is 1932. We're in Western Australia, right in the middle of the Great Depression. And out on these remote farms, two very different armies are about to face off.
All right, so on one side, you've got these struggling World War I veterans. The government gave them land to farm wheat, but things are tough. I mean, really tough. Wheat prices have crashed, and the government subsidies they were promised never showed up. And on the other side, a literal army of 20,000 emus migrating inland. For them, these new farms are like an all-you-can-eat buffet. For the farmers, it was a complete and total invasion.
And look, we're not talking about pigeons here. The emu is a serious piece of work. These things can stand up to 6 feet tall as a person, and they are built to last. They can run crazy fast, and those muscular legs have these huge claws that can do some real damage. As the Australian Army was about to learn the hard way, you just don't mess with emus. So the farmers are at their wits' end. The emus aren't just eating their crops. They're destroying fences, letting other pests in. It's a disaster. So what do these ex-soldiers do? They ask for what they know, military backup. They ask for machine guns. And the craziest part? The Minister of Defense actually said yes. And this was a totally official operation, not just some guys with guns. Here was the deal. The army provides the soldiers to use the machine guns. The government pays for them to get there. But, and this is a big but, the farmers had to provide food, a place to stay, and pay for all the ammunition. So the mission was on. I mean, they were taking this so seriously. Major Meredith rolls up with 2 soldiers, 2 Lewis machine guns, and get this, 10,000 rounds of ammo. The plan was simple, overwhelm the birds with firepower. They were so confident they were going to win, they even brought a camera crew to film the whole thing for the newsreels. What could possibly go wrong, right? All right, so the battle begins. November 2nd, the troops are in position. They're probably picturing an easy victory, just mowing down huge flocks of birds. But the emus apparently didn't get the memo. Day 1, a total disaster. They try to set an ambush, but the emus just scatter into small groups, impossible to hit. A couple of days later, they get their big chance. 1,000 emus heading towards a dam. This is it. They open fire, and the machine gun jams. After just 12 kills, it jams. The rest of the birds? Gone. It was a complete and utter mess. And this is where it gets really wild. The soldiers started talking about the emus' tactics, like they were an organized army. One expert even joked that the emu command ordered guerrilla warfare. Seriously, the troops swore that each group had a leader, a huge bird that would act as a lookout and warn the others. They even tried chasing them in a truck with a machine gun mounted on it, but the emus just outran them. It was chaos. You can just feel the military's frustration. Major Meredith himself, in his official report, basically said these birds were like tanks. Tanks. He couldn't believe how they could take multiple hits and just keep on running. It was like the emus were completely ignoring the fact they were supposed to be easy targets. And so, after only 6 days, just 6 days, it was over. The first attempt was a complete failure. The Australian Army, with all its modern weapons, had to pack up and go home, beaten by birds. You can bet the newspapers had a lot of fun with that. Let's just look at the numbers, because they really tell the story. In that first week, they fired 2,500 bullets. And how many emus did they get? The official number is about 50. 50. Even if we're being generous and say it was a couple hundred, that is just, wow. It's beyond inefficient. It's straight up embarrassing. Well, as you can imagine, the story blew up. You had all this bad press, politicians are asking questions in Parliament. It was a PR nightmare. So the Minister of Defense had to pull the plug. On November 8th, the troops were officially called back. Round 1, emus.
But hold on, the story's not over yet. The emus were still there, and the farmers were still desperate, so they begged for another shot. This leads to round 2. But eventually, everyone realized there had to be a better way to handle this.
So just a few days later, the army goes back in. And to be fair, they do a little better this time. Over the next month, they managed to get 986 kills. But, and this is a huge but, it took them almost 10,000 bullets to do it. That's literally 10 bullets for every single emu. It was still a hugely wasteful operation. Okay, let's really put this into perspective. The big military operation with machine guns gets less than 1,000 emus, okay? Then, a couple of years later, the government tries something way simpler, a bounty system. And what happens? In just 6 months, over 57,000 bounties are claimed. Turns out the simple, low-tech way was way, way better.
So yeah, the government finally learned its lesson. After that, anytime someone asked for the army to fight emus, the answer was a hard no. The real long-term solution wasn't a war. It was just building better fences. A much more boring but way more effective solution. And really, that's what this whole story comes down to. The Great Emu War is just this perfect, kind of funny, kind of sad example of what happens when you throw a massive, complicated solution at a really simple problem. It's a great reminder, right? Sometimes the biggest threat isn't the one with the biggest army, but the one you never saw coming. Or, in this case, the one you just completely underestimated.